the same vein, discussing semantics and discussing terminologies and using them to search for different kinds of content. So we started in the area about 14 years ago when we had the idea that we could actually disambiguate terminologies and use this as a means of discovering information. And at that point in time, the promise was pretty much based on what was the semantic web and Web 2. And I think that much of that really has materialized, but far more slowly than I think that we would have liked to. And the idea is that if you do deep linking of the content, you can actually bring additional information into the content. And the question then is, how do you integrate that into your knowledge systems, and how do you integrate that into your workflow? The other thing is that this also requires a highly standardized form of content. At the time we started, we were actually working in an SGML environment, and XML was just beginning to emerge, as were DOIs. But what we were really interested in doing was develop some kind of an interoperable technology and providing some kind of a use case that we might be able to pitch to potential publishers. The other thing about the semantic web is it would provide some promise for a variety of new products. We're beginning to hear about what some of those new products are. We just heard that from Albert a moment ago. There are real benefits in which you can actually use semantic technology for developing new technologies. But there's also a reality, because many of the technologies have been very slow to evolve, and our finding was that we've also seen changes in the way in which people read. We no longer read a document from front to back or top to bottom. We tend to essentially read to a certain point, find the information we want, and then we're off looking for other pieces of information. We're starting to harvest horizontally across the literature. And so what we were finding was that when we were talking with publishers, that the semantic technology really wasn't catching on like we were hoping it to, because the return on investment simply wasn't there. And when we were pitching it, it was kind of an idea that this works really well for the consumer, but what's in it for me? What do I get? And the other thing is that when you start doing deep linking, all of a sudden people are leaving the publishers' websites and they're going off to many other publishers' websites or alternative places, and usually they're not coming back. And so this is one of the other conditions that we were being presented with when we were talking with them. But one of the things that we did come up with that seems to stick, and we know that certainly Altmetrics is actually pursuing our stuff, is that we have citable research artifacts that we actually have embedded with DOI, so we can embed them directly into the content, and this now allows us to develop some really nice ways of not only indexing literature, but developing fingerprints for documents that are topically related. And this allows us to search in a very different way that is very powerful and allows us to filter things with an entire terminology or set of concepts. Now, I already described the Scribe to you this morning. This is pretty much our semantic engine that allows us to essentially process documents. We can do this on the fly, or we can do this in a batch mode on a corpus of documents. What it allows us to do is then tie the literature to a number of different external resources, not just literature, but external databases that most people in life sciences for certain are using, such as GenBank, Culture Collections, many other places, even though they may not have identifiers, and we can build up resources that allow us to work with in these environments. The trick is we use globally unique identifiers. Our preferred way of using our GUID is a DOI, but there are a number of others that are out there that operate equally well. What's really nice about DOIs is that they're also actionable, so we can do quite a bit with a single DOI call, and we can actually deliver a whole set of nested pieces of information directly to the end user. Plus, the technology that we developed also allows us to persistently disambiguate terminologies. This actually came out of a need to figure out what happens when nomenclatures of organisms is constantly changing. In bacteriology, we had over 640 changes in terminology in the last 90 days. Think about what it's like when you have a language in which you have that many new terms or changes in meaning, and it occurs on a daily basis. And so what this all allows us to do now is to actually go in and retrieve large blocks of content very easily and very simply, and this is a generalized or generic technology. And it gives us, as I said, a fingerprint on the documents, and it's based on not a semantic model, but a full semiotic model, which maps terms to concepts and then concepts to all the related information. The tool that we actually use then for perusing content is what we call the guide. It was originally designed as a web app that would operate with a browser and allow you to read anybody's content and do on-the-fly markup as you pull the article into the browser. But what we found is that the browser developers have now, instead of unifying their approaches, they have gone off in a number of different ways. And so what the guide allows us to do is operate server-side in a way that's completely neutral with regard to the development, to the browsers that are actually used for pulling down content. And so this is a simple piece of Java code, JavaScript that actually runs server-side and allows us to provide all the services. Now, also remember, all of our identifiers get embedded directly into the content. This can be done either pre-publication or at composition time. And once this is in the document, they remain in the document, and all of this becomes indexable using our identifiers, and all of the information is constantly being updated because we have curated external resources that feed back into the DOIs and allow us to do the updates. So what the guide actually allows us to do now is to dynamically annotate content with our identifiers and then provide some information. Just let me show you what the guide can actually do for us. So this is an example of a manuscript, and I spoke about this in my earlier session, and this is the sort of thing that we do on content as it's being read in, and what we do, and this is the sort of thing that we provide back to the author. And here we have different classes of identifiers. For instance, culture collectors, there's no unified identifier, so what we've done is we've built a resolver for this. Each one of these names will have resolved all of the appropriate history. We have, here's a genome identifier, here we have gene identifiers from GenBank. So all of this information is now directly linked in the content, and it's never lost. Now keep also in mind that all of these pieces of information are being updated constantly. So even though you have this piece of content, now it's linked at one point in time and it's being consistently updated from the external resources. And you also see the kinds of information that we also provide for editors and for reviewers. And I'll be done in just a minute or two. And so this is, we can also do the annotation in tables. We can do the annotation on graphics. We're doing this with Exeter Premedia, with the Society of Microbiology in the UK. And this is what our Scribe looks like when we're reading over a published content. This is an article from the SGM's website. And here you can see all of a sudden what we can do is provide a whole series of nested information that sits over top of a publisher's content. And what this does is it increases dwell time on the publisher's content, giving the reader the opportunity to essentially query different pieces of information. In this particular case, we're looking at organismal information, and we can give a full record of all this information. We can map back into all sorts of other pieces of related information, and this is constantly being updated from curated resources. And so the published content now remains persistently updated. And so that's the sort of thing that we can do. And we can also add in additional services such as biosafety levels. This becomes a really important area, for instance, in public health. And so there's the opportunity to do this with semantics. And it's a fairly easy sort of thing to do. It can be done on the HTML, and it can also be done on the PDF, so it will consistently resolve our content.